Hey, what's going on, guys? In this video, I'm going to be walking you through VPC peering and how it works. So when we talk about VPC peering is nothing but a feature on AWS VPCs that is used to connect two VPCs together so that they can behave as one network. And when you say two things behave as one network, that just simply means that resources inside of those VPCs can be able to talk to each other privately without the traffic going over the internet. So in this video, I'm just going to walk you through how you could set that up. And one thing you should understand about VPC peering is the fact that your VPCs can be in different regions. They can be in the same region. They can be in other regions. That does not matter. They can be in different accounts. That does not matter. But with the VPC peering, you can still be able to pair those VPCs to each other. Now, one other thing you should also understand is that when you are making use of VPC peering, your VPCs are not supposed to overlap with each other. That is in terms of the SATA block ranges. So with VPC peering, it does not support overlapping SATA block ranges. And also with VPC peering, you have to understand that there is no transitive routing. That means that if VPC A can pair with VPC B, and let's say VPC B can pair with VPC C, it does not mean that automatically VPC C can pair with VPC A. If you want that to happen, you need to set up a pairing request. Now, one thing you should understand about VPC pairing is that the first thing you're going to do is to actually set up that pairing connection. And the way that works is this VPC is going to send a pairing connection request to this one. And then this one is going to accept that pairing request. And then those VPCs can be able to pair with each other. And because VPCs pair with each other, it does not mean that the resources in there can automatically talk to the resources in this one privately. No. If you want that connectivity to happen or that communication to happen through the peering connection, you need to update the route tables of the subnet where those resources are. So let's say, for example, let's say in this VPC, you want this instance in this subnet to talk to this instance in this subnet. Now, one thing you have to do is you need to update the route table of this subnet where the instance is, so that any traffic that is destined to the SATA block of this subnet should pass through that peering connection. And also, if you want this instance to talk to this one, you have to ensure that traffic that is destined to the subnet of this instance, one thing you have to do is you need to update the route table to actually make use of this peering connection to be able to send that traffic through the peering connection to this instance in the subnet. So we're actually going to take a look at how that works. So I'm going to actually create two VPCs. And when I create these two VPCs, you're going to see this one is just going to be a private VPC. I will make use of a bastion host just simply because I want to jump from my computer to my house network. And that is just simply because I do not have client-to-site VPN set up yet. So I will need to jump from my house computer to the VPC network by making use of the bastion host. Then from the bastion host, I am going to jump to this instance in this private subnet. And from this instance in this private subnet, you're going to see that I will try to establish a connection from this instance to this one. And from this bastion host too, I can be able to set up a connection from the instance, from this bastion host to this instance by making use of this peering connection. So we're going to actually see how that actually works. So I'm just going to go to my AWS account right now. This is my AWS account. I'm going to create those two VPCs in different regions, okay? So the first region I'm going to make use of is US West 1, that's the North California region. So I'll go over to VPC. And over here on VPC, just going to click on create VPC on the top right. Over here, I'll go to VPC and more so that I can just create all the different components. And I'll just simply call this VPC 1. And I'll leave the SATA block of 10.0.0.0/16, or I can just decide to simply make use of a /24. I'm going to scroll down And for the availability zone, I'm going to stay with one availability zone so that I'm just going to have one public subnet and one private subnet. And I don't need a NAT gateway, neither do I need a VPC endpoint. So I'm just going to click on none. So what this is going to do is it's going to help me to launch a VPC. And in that VPC, I'm going to have two subnets, one public and one private. I'm going to have two route tables, one route table for the public subnet, one route table for the private subnet. And you can see that the IGW is linked to the public subnet. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'll click on create VPC. Good. So that works. I'm going to simply go to US West 2. And in US West 2, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm just going to go to VPC and more over here. And I'll call this VPC2. I'll call this VPC2. And I'm just going to make sure that the CIDR block does not overlap. So I'm going to make this over 20 for the CIDR block, 20.0.0.0. Maybe I give it a /24. And in here, I just need one subnet for this demonstration. So I'll say one availability zone. Yep, so I want one private subnet. So you can see it's going to create a VPC with one private subnet and the private subnet's route table. And I mean, that is going to be it. I don't want a NAT gateway. I don't want a VPC endpoint. So I don't need any of that. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'll do create VPC. All right. So we can see that we have VPC we've created in US West 1 and another one in US West 2. One is called VPC2, the other one is called VPC1. So from any of the VPCs, I can be able to establish a peering connection request. So let's say this VPC is going to be the one to send the VPC peering connection request. So I'm just going to scroll down here to peering connections. And one thing I need is I am going to definitely need the CIDR block of the other VPC. So let me just try this and see. I'm going to click on create peering connection. And over here on create peering connection, I'm just going to say VPC 1, US West 1, VPC 2, US West 2. So that's simply the name. I'm just going to give it a name like this. And I'm just going to say select a local VPC to pair with. I will say the VPC I want it to pair with is in another region. And I'm going to specify the region. It is US West 1. That's where the other VPC is. And for the VPC ID, I don't have that right now. So I need to go get the VPC ID. So I don't want this to delete. So I'm just going to come here. I'll duplicate this tab. And over here, I'll go to US West 1, where I created that VPC. I'll go to VPC. I'll come to VPC. This is the VPC. I will copy the VPC ID. This is the VPC ID. I'll copy it using Control-C. And then I'll simply just go back to Oregon. And I'll simply just come and I'll paste that VPC ID here. And now from this VPC in Oregon, I'm going to send a peering connection request to the other VPC. So I'll click on create peering connection. It says I should select a local VPC. So which VPC is trying to make that request? So VPC2 is trying to create a connection request with VPC1 that is in the other region, which is US West 1. So I'm just going to click on create peering connection. So VPC2 has sent a peering connection request. So I need to go and accept that. So I'm going to go to the other region, this US West 1. I'll go to the VPC over there. You see, I'm going to be here on peering connection, and I need to click on actions, and I need to accept that request. So are you sure you want this VPC peering connection? You see, it's saying that the requested region is this region, and this is the requester's CIDR block. So that's the VPC CIDR block that is making that request. I'm just going to click on accept request. Good. So you can see that that is accepted. Now, so we have the peering connection set up. So our peering connection is set up. This peering connection is set up, but that is not enough. So if we want our instances to make use of that peering connection, we need to update their route tables. So I'm going to do that later. I'll simply just go back to what I was doing over here. and I will simply go to EC2, and I am going to create 3 EC2 instances. So I'm going to create for VPC1, which is in US1, I'm going to create 2 instances, one that is going to be the bastion host, and the other one that is going to be the private instance. So I'll just simply do that. So you can see right now I'm in US1, where I have the VPC that has the public subnet and the private subnet. I'll click on instances. I'll go over here to launch instances, and I'm just going to say this is my bastion. I'm just going to call it my bastion host, and I'm going to stay with the default Amazon Linux AMI. I will stay with the default instance type, and for this I'll simply just create a key. For this I'll just call this VPC1 bastion. So I'll call this VPC1 bastion, and I'll just simply do create key pair, and I'm going to come here to network settings. This is for the bastion host. So I'm going to choose that VPC1, and I'm going to make sure that the subnet is public, and I'm going to enable public auto assign IP, just so that the bastion host is going to have a public IP address. And I'm going to create a security group for that bastion host. I'm going to call that bastion host security group. And for the description, I'm just going to say allow SSH from my house computer. Allow SSH from my house computer or from my house network. And I'm going to come over here. I'll just add a rule in that security group, which is going to be allowing traffic coming from my computer. So I'm just going to say my IP. So AWS is going to automatically pick up my IP. So it's going to allow SSH traffic coming from my IP. That is all what I'm going to set for the bastion host. I'm going to click on launch instance. All right. So you can see that I have the bastion host. This is the bastion host. It is being created. I will simply just go and create the private instance. So I'm talking about this instance. So in that same VPC, I'm going to create the private instance in the private subnet. So I'm just going to go to launch instances, and I am going to call this private instance VPC1, and I'm going to stay with the default AMI, which is Amazon Linux. I'm going to stay with the default instance type. And for the key pair, I'm going to click on create new key pair, and I'm going to say VPC1 private instance, something like that. I'm just giving the key pair, which I can remember. I'm going to go ahead, I'll do create key pair. So we can see that that private key has been downloaded onto my computer. So I'm just going to come over here, network settings, and I'm just simply going to say that allow SSH traffic. So I'm just going to create a security group. But before doing that, I need to edit my network settings. So I'm going to make sure that the instance is created in that my VPC1 VPC. It should be created in the private subnet. It does not need a public IP address because it's going to be created in the private subnet. And I'm going to say create a security group, and it should actually have that security group called VPC1 private security group, something like that. And I'm just simply going to say allow SSH traffic from bastion. So it should allow SSH traffic coming from the bastion host. So as of right now, I'm just going to remove this security group rule, and later I'm going to add that as we continue with the class video. So I'm going to go ahead, I'll click on launch instance. All right, so those 2 instances have been created. I'm just going to do the same thing for the other VPC where I need to have the private instance. So I'm just going to go to US West 2. So when I go over here, it takes me to US West 2, you can see. So over here on US West 2, I'm going to create another instance. So I'm going to call this 5.2. Yeah, I'm going to call this VPC2 5.2 instance. Good, something like this. And I'm going to stay with the default AMI. I'm going to stay with the default instance type. And for the key pair, I'm just simply going to give it a name. So maybe I'm just going to call this, I'll create a key, I'll call this 5.2 US West 2, something like that. And I'll go ahead and I'll click on create key pair. So I am now creating that instance in the other region. So I'm going to come here, I'll click on edit. I will make sure that the instance is created in the VPC2. is going to be created in this private subnet. It doesn't need the public IP address. And I'll simply just say allow SSH from VPC1, something like that. And sorry, for the security group name, it's just going to be US West VPC2, 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 5 security group. Then I can just simply say allow SSH from VPC1. Then I'm just going to remove this as of right now. I don't need that as of now. I'm going to do that later on. This looks good. I'll just go ahead. I'll click on launch instance. So you can see we've actually created the 3 instances. You can see 2 of the instances are in private subnets, even though they're in different VPCs. And we have our bastion host. We just have this bastion host because we want to be able to jump from our computer to the bastion host. And from this bastion host, using the VPC peering, we can be able to connect to this instance in the private subnet, because VPC peering connects both VPCs together to behave as one network. That means that any resource in here can talk to the other resource using private IP addresses. But for that to happen, we need to update their route tables. So let's say, for example, we want this instance to talk to this one. We're going to need to update the route table for that to happen. So you're going to see that later. So I'm just simply going to jump into my bastion host, and from my bastion host, I'm going to connect to the instance in the private subnet using SSH. And from this instance in the private subnet, I'm also going to try to connect to this instance in this other private subnet of the other VPC using SSH. It's going to happen because I am making use of a VPC peering connection. So I'm just going to go back to where I was doing the demo, and you can see that I have all the instances created. I'm just going to go back to instances. You can see they are all created. I'll go to the bastion host, and I'm going to copy the public IP address of the bastion host. So I've copied the public IP address of the bastion host, and I am going to connect to it. So I'm just going to stay here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my downloads folder. So I'll go to my downloads folder. Okay. And over here, I'm going to change the permissions of my key. Please, if you're making use of a Windows, you don't need to change the permissions of your key. And you can simply just connect to the bastion host, making use of mobile extern. Okay. So I'm just doing this on my terminal. I'm okay with that. So I'm going to change the permissions of the key because I am making use of a Mac OS operating system. So I'm just going to do change mode 400, and the key pair name of that is VPC bastion. So I'm just going to add a .pem to it. Good, and that is good. And now I'll connect to that bastion host, SSH-I, then the name of the key pair, VPC1 bastion.pem, and I'm going to connect to the instance as the EC2 user, and then I'm going to paste the public IP address, and this should connect me to the bastion host. So I'll say yes, connect me to the bastion host. Good. So you can see I'm connected to the bastion host, and I can confirm that based on the IP address. You can see it is 10.0.0.4. That's the private IP address, 10.0.0.4. You can see this is the private IP address of the bastion host, 10.0.0.4. So you can see that I am in the bastion host. Now, guys, from the bastion host, I am going to jump to this instance in the private subnet. And we know that if we want that to happen, what I need to do is the first thing I'll need to open up the security group of the private instance to allow traffic coming from the bastion host. So I need to allow the security group have the security group allow traffic coming from the bastion host. So I will copy the private IP of the bastion host, because both of them are in the same network, so they can be able to talk to each other using private IP addresses. I'll go to the security group of the private instance, and I'll go to security over here, click on the security group. I'll click on edit inbound rules, and I'm going to add a rule saying that it should allow SSH, which is coming from, you see, it should allow SSH coming from the private IP of the bastion host. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, so I've allowed that, I've created that channel. The next thing I need to do is I need to make sure that the private key of this instance is actually available in here. So the private key that was created when this instance was created, I need to have that private key in here because I need to be able to authenticate using the private key. So what do I do, guys? You can see that when I launch this instance, that's the instance in VPC1, the private instance, this one, the private key was downloaded into my computer. This is the private key, VPC1 5instance.pem. So let's confirm that, guys. I'll come here to EC2. I'll go to EC2 dashboard. I'll click on instances. And you can see that I do have this instance. This is the instance that I want to connect to from the bastion host. And what I need to do is I need to copy the private IP. Not right now, though. I'm going to simply just show you this is the private key, VPC1 private instance, but the private key is actually downloaded on my computer right now. So I need to go and look for that private key. I'll copy the content. So on my bastion host, I'm going to create a file where that private key is going to be. So I'll create a file on my bastion host. I'll do vi, and I'll simply just say prive.pem, something like that. I'll create a file, and I need to paste the content of that private key, but it's on my computer. So I'm going to go to my computers. I'll go to my computer's command prompt, my computer's file explorer, and I will simply get that private key. So I'll come to downloads and I'll scroll all the way up. You can see this is what I'm looking for, VPC1 5instance.pem. So I will simply open this with text edit. Please, if you're making use of a Mac, if you're making use of a Windows computer, you can make use of something that you can be able to open this key file. So you can see I'm just going to open it. I'll copy the content, and then I'll simply go back to my bastion host, the file. I'll paste that content inside. Now I'll escape the column WQ. Now I have that private key inside of the bastion host. I also have the security group of the private instance open. So from the bastion host, I'm going to connect to this private instance. So I'll copy the private IP, and I'll just simply do SSH-I, and I'll specify that key file name, prive.pem, and then I'm going to do EC2-user add the private IP address of that private instance. So from the bastion host, I should be able to connect. All right, I'll do yes. Good. So it says that unprotected private key. So my private key is very exposed. So if I do ls-l, you can see that the permissions of the key is very exposed. So I'm just going to change the permissions of the key by doing change mode 400. And then I'm going to specify the name of the key, prive.pem. It's going to change the permissions. And then I'm going to rerun that command by hitting my upper key arrow 2 times. You can see, or try, I think I'm just going to do that over and over until it gets me to this command again, and I'll hit enter. So now you can see that I am connected to that instance, that private instance. You can see this is the private IP address of the private instance. You can see that I have jumped into that instance from the bastion host. So I'm actually in that private instance right now. So from this private instance, I want to connect to this. I want to be able to connect to this instance. So normally they should be able to talk to each other because I have enabled a VPC peering connection. It makes these 2 networks to become one. But if I want that traffic to be able to get here from this instance, I need to update the route table. So in the route table of this subnet where this instance is, I'm going to have a route. So I'm going to make sure that there is a route that has a destination, which is the CIDR block of this instances subnet, and a target, which is the VPC parent. That means that anytime traffic is leaving from here, going to any IP within this CIDR block, the traffic should pass through the VPC parent connection. And normally when you send a request, there's going to be a response. So I'm going to make sure that in the route table of this subnet, I'm going to have a destination, which is the CIDR block of this subnet where this instance is, and it should have a target, which is this VPC pairing. So that means anytime traffic leaving from here is going to this CIDR block or to this subnet, it should pass through this VPC pairing. So that is simply what you need to do for this instance to be able to connect to this one. So if you want this bastion host to connect to this instance in the other VPC in the private subnet, I need to do the same thing. So you need to update the route table in such a way that it has a destination, which is the CIDR block of this subnet. And the target should be this. So that means that traffic leaving from here, I'm going to this network, should pass through this VPC pairing. And I need to also update this route table to have any traffic going to this CIDR block where this bastion host is, that traffic should pass through the VPC pairing. So I'm just going to go to VPC. I'm just going to go to VPC. And you can see this is the VPC. I'm just going to make sure that I copy. I'm going to go to route tables. You can see this is the route table of the instance of the private instance. This is the route table of its subnet, right? So what I'm going to do is I am simply just going to copy the CIDR block. I'll copy the CIDR block. This is the CIDR block of the instance. This is the CIDR block of the instances subnet. You can see if I click here, it's the same thing. That is the CIDR block 10.0.0.0.128. So I'll just copy that CIDR block of the private instance. And then I am going to go to US West 2. So I'm just going to go to Oregon and I will look for that private subnet. This is it. This is the private subnet of that private instance. I'll look for its route table by simply just coming down here to route table, and I'll click on edit route table. And sorry, I'll go to cancel. I'll click on route table here. I'm going to go to that route table. This is the route table. Just click on it again. Click on edit routes, and then I'm going to paste. So this is just simply saying that, all right, anytime traffic is going to this destination, it should route that traffic through the VPC pairing. So I've done that. I'll save the changes. Good. I'll copy the CIDR block of this subnet too as a CIDR block. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'll go to the route table of that private subnet in VPC1. I'll go to its route table. I think it's this one, VPC1, route table, this one. I'll click on it. I'll click on edit routes. I'm going to say any traffic that is destined to this CIDR block, that traffic should make use of the pairing connection. So that's how I set that up. I'll click on save changes. Good. So because I've done that, that should be good enough. So the next thing I need to do is I need to make sure that the security group of the instance is simply allowing that traffic. So I'm just going to come back to EC2 here. So from this private instance, I want to actually be able to, I want to remotely connect from this private instance to the instance that is in the private subnet of VPC2. So I'll click on instance ID, I'll copy the private IP of that instance, I'll copy the private IP, and I will simply just go to this US West 2, then I'll go to that instance, I'll go to its security group so that it is going to allow traffic coming from that instance. So I'm going to click on edit inbound rules, I'll click on add rule, and then I'm going to add a rule. Sorry, I'm just going to delete this. I'll click on SSH, and then I'm going to paste that private instance's IP address so that the security group of this instance is going to allow SSH traffic coming from it. Now I've done that. The next thing I need to do is I need to make sure that the key file that was used to create this instance, that key file is within this private instance. So you can see I'm actually connected to that private instance, this one. I'm connected to it. So I need to make sure that inside of it, the key file that was used to create this instance is in here. Now, when I created this instance, the key file was downloaded on my computer. So let me go and look for the name. So I'll just simply go to that instance in US West 2. This is the instance. I'll look for the key file name. So if I scroll down, you can see this is the key file name, drive to US West 2. I'll copy it. I'll go to my file. I'll go to my file explorer on my computer. So if I go here, this is my file explorer on my computer. I'm simply just going to look for it by pasting it here. This is it. So I'm going to click open with. Please, if you're making use of a Windows, make use of Notepad. I'm going to open mine with text edit because I'm using a Mac OS. So I'll click on open. Good. It has opened up on my other screen. So I'm just simply going to go there. I'll copy the content. And then I'll come back here. I'm going to create a file inside of this private instance. I'll just simply do vi drive.pem, something like that. And then I'll simply just paste this. I'll do escape, then I'll do column WQ. Good. So I have actually done that. Now, what I'm going to do is I will now, from this instance, I will now connect to this instance. So from this instance, I'll now connect to this one. So I've opened up the security group. I've made sure that the key file that was used to create this is in here. So I should be able to establish that connection. So first of all, I'm going to change the permissions of the key. So I'm going to do change mode 400. I'll hit enter. Then what I'm going to do is I'm now going to do SSH-R. Then the key file name. This is the key file name that I created, drive.pem. Then I'm going to do ec2-user at the private IP address of this instance. So if I go back on Aragon, this is that instance as a private IP. I'll paste that here. Okay. If this works, that means that that traffic is going through the VPC peering. I'll say yes. Good. You can see that I am connected to the instance that is in the private subnet of VPC2 in the other region. So the traffic is actually leaving from here. From the route table, it directs the traffic to the VPC peering, and from there it gets to that instance. So that is simply how VPC peering works. Thank you so much for watching. If you do like the video, please subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you again.